are a group of people who are very concerned about the changes that are happening at the World Health Organization at the moment. We are, most of us here are aware of the changes that they are willing to do. And we would like to have you here with us and talk to us and explain to us from your point of view and from your experience, what have you done so far, as we would like to take action as well. We are at the very practical stage at the moment. We also have a website in Hebrew, and I can introduce it in a second here. We also have it. It explains in general what is going on. And this is your website, which actually says is calling to prevent genocide 2030. And you have, I think it's better if I let you explain what you have on your website.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I can't tell you how delighted I am. My belief is that the more of us around the world who understand the threat and are committed not just to talking about it, talkavists inform people, but that really doesn't solve the problem, committed to actually acting. The more of us there are around the world, the more successful we will be in quite literally saving humanity. That's a bold claim, but since you already have a website demanding that Israel exit the WHO, you probably understand the nature, the magnitude, the breathtaking hubris and evil of the plan that is being implemented rapidly to destroy us all. I must say, I am Jewish, and I am aware that we have always been a beleaguered people for one reason or another. And now, you know, the WHO, one of their magic words is equity. Well, now there's equity. Everybody is beleaguered and marked for extermination or enslavement. It's not a good equity, but that's exactly what's happened. Vera Sharov, whom you probably know, has created a 5-hour documentary called Never Again Is Now Global.com. And I'm going to put that in the chat. If you have not seen that, you must see it. She details exactly how the German Holocaust was implanted into society and made acceptable in the same way that our Holocaust, now ongoing, has been implanted in our society. And it's a magnificent piece of work that I suggest everyone watch and share. I've also put my email, dr.rima@naturalsolutionsfoundation.com, in the chat so that you can reach out to me, and I hope you will. And I do read every email, but it takes me a while.
We are, the film or the series by Vera Sharav has been also translated to Hebrew with subtitles. And yes, it is available, it has been translated by a group of volunteers. And it is available, yes, it is available for people on the website of Nowhere to Know.
Excellent. So who am I? Why am I sitting here in my Zoom world, sharing your Zoom world? Well, I was graduated from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in 1970, which I am pleased to say is still within living memory. And on my very first day of my very first class in medical school, our professor of pharmacology, of course, that was the first class, our professor of pharmacology said, there are only side effects to all drugs because they all work by the same mechanism. They all poison enzyme systems. And I said, how does that help people if you're poisoning enzyme systems? I will find a different way. I will not poison my patient's enzyme systems. So I have practiced medicine and psychiatry without using any prescription drugs at all in a 53-year practice. So that tells you immediately that I have a different take on things. I am also a person who believes in social justice and fairness. So I've been involved in political activities since the age of 14. In September, I will be 80. You can do the math. I have a fairly long perspective on political action. And I know that there are a few things that I believe to be true. The first is that the only thing that changes political realities, and we are dealing with a profoundly dangerous, profoundly aggressive political reality in terms of global control. I'll talk about how we got there in a moment. But the only thing that I know that works is when people are moved by passion from the heart, and that passion moves up to their heads, and that moves their arms, and that changes behavior. Without that passion, if we only give people intellectual information and facts, nothing changes. And to be very blunt about it, we will be very well informed on the way to the gas chamber. That must not happen. Consequently, music is critically important. People who create art, who talk about the reason from a heart center that this is not to be permitted, those people are heard and those people make change. And most of us, I'm assuming here, are trained to be intellectual in their approaches to problems. And so we think that by thinking about something and understanding it, we have solved it. That's not so. We need to translate that into actual action. So how then do we act when the international bodies have created, I would love to read the chats, but of course they're in Hebrew, and my ability to do that is long, long gone. But
Rima, don't worry about the chat because someone is translating it to Hebrew.
Oh, okay.
Simultaneously.
All right. But you know, I'm one of those people who just wants to read everything, cereal boxes, chats, everything. So to go back to how do we act? Let's first talk about what do we need to act against, and then how do we act effectively? Every country in the world signed on to Agenda 21 in 1992. There were no exceptions. Even Bhutan, whose king is very interested in the happiness of his people, even Bhutan signed on to destroy the society, the genetics, the freedom, the independence, the very humanity of every human being. How did that happen? Well, it's a very important question, I thought, so I started doing some research. And what I discovered was that we are at the tail end of a very carefully laid approximately 140-year plan. And the way it happened was this. I'll be brief. There's a great deal of detail which I've presented elsewhere, and I can make that presentation available to you if you like. But in brief, the story is this. John D. Rockefeller Sr. was the world's first billionaire. He was a ruthless, very, very aggressive guy who realized that anything he could do to make himself really, really rich was okay. And he did quite terrible things, but he became the world's first billionaire. He also controlled the world's oil production. And he created an empire that impacts the world very, very clearly today, because he realized that he could use his money not only for his own pleasure, but to reshape the world. He was among the first supporters of genocide and eugenics. And his son, John D. Rockefeller Jr., ran the family business for about 5 years, but then decided that he really preferred running the family's philanthropic empire. Now we're talking about predatory philanthropy of the Bill Gates type. Bill Gates is simply a bud from that particular tree of using money to change the world to be the way you want it, no matter what that does to the rest of the world. So he was a depopulationist, he was a eugenicist, and John D. Rockefeller Jr. set up the, quote, scientific study, end quote, of eugenics in Germany at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institutes in Munich and Berlin, and supported the eugenics scientists before, during, and after the Second World War. And then when they were in disfavor after Germany lost the war, he brought thousands of them to the United States to continue their work. And indeed, John D. Rockefeller III created, along with Allen Dulles, in 1951, the Population Council, which is acknowledged in its purpose to carry out further eugenics study and principles. So we're talking about a world system designed to eliminate a vast number of people, subdue most of those left, and create a master race at the top. The German situation didn't go entirely as planned, but it did not deter these people. So they captured medicine, as I'm sure you know. They captured governance with the same procedures worldwide. They taught countries how to govern in a modern way through the Laura Steadman Rockefeller system. They created the faux science of public health. They created the faux science of virology, and they have controlled the very dangerous science of genetic manipulation and biological tinkering with the DNA of humanity and animals. They created that all in order to bring about what we are attempting to prevent now. This has been a long-term plan, and I know this not because I'm psychic, not because somebody whispered in my ear, but because I can read. Remember cereal boxes and chats? The story is briefly that since I was treating patients without drugs, using frequency detoxification, intravenous and oral nutrition, neurobiofeedback, et cetera, so people would come to me for more and more broadly placed diagnoses, because I am trained as a psychiatrist, child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, and I am trained in psychiatry and neurology. Well, people would come to me with diseases that had nothing to do with psychiatry or neurology in the schema that we use, saying, I've been told that there's no hope, I have to, the doctor said to go home and die, or I've been told I have to live with the pain, or there's nothing more that can be done for me. Can you help? And my answer would be, I don't know, but we'll try. And generally, yes, the incurable disease was cured, the intractable pain was relieved, and so on. So desperate people have desperate friends, and they started telling each other, and people started coming to my office from around the world. One of those people was a head of state, a woman who walks around with a crown on her head at state events in her state. And she came to me for a physical problem. And one day she said to me, you know, it's almost time for the great culling to begin. And I had never heard of the great culling. I said, what are you talking about? And she explained that she was talking about the culling of the useless eaters. Now, in 2002, that was a phrase I had never heard. And I said, what's a useless eater? She said, not what, my dear, but who? I said, okay, who's a useless eater? She said, those people who are consuming our non-renewable resources. And I said, did it ever occur to you that you're consuming their non-renewable resources? And she said, oh, that's an interesting idea. Well, anyway, and she dismissed that. I said, so how many of these useless eaters are you planning on culling? And she said, 90%. And I said, 90% of what? And she said, the total world population. And I said, whoa. The enormous wealth that you have, and this was one of the wealthiest people in the world, who, by the way, did not pay her bill. None of the elites paid their bills.
Really?
All of the regular people paid their bills. So I went to the procedure of charging the elites in advance in cash for their treatment that day. Everybody else I trusted. Anyway, I said, your enormous wealth is based on selling immense amounts of shit to vast numbers of people. If you don't have vast numbers of people to sell your immense amounts of shit to, how are you going to maintain your enormous wealth? And she said, the mercantile era that began in the 14th century with the Hanseatic League in Germany is coming to an end. We are coming to the beginning of the neo-feudal era. There will be us, the neo-aristocrats at the top, surrounded by our servants and servitors, and below them, our technicians. Everyone else is superfluous. And Yuval Harari has made the same point most recently, has he not? Everyone who gets in the way will be eliminated, and everyone who is not part of that pyramid is in the way. So she left, and I was not sure whether she was just batshit crazy, and I had missed it because I was dealing with a physical thing, not evaluating her psychiatrically, or whether she had given me a great clue. And of course, the answer is both. She was batshit crazy. She was raised to be a psychopath. She is a psychopath. And at the same time, she gave me a tunnel that I had to burrow down into. I did a great deal of research. I read their documents. I learned about the Fabian socialists. That's what they were called around the turn of the 20th century. We call them globalists. They're the same evil people. I learned that George Orwell wrote 1984 as a prescription of what was to come. I learned that Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World as a blueprint for what was to come. I learned that these people were dead serious, and I do mean that word very clearly, dead serious when WHO was created, its constitution, which is what every country in the world has signed on to, its constitution made it clear that it had only 5 areas of activity, and those areas were all advisory. WHO is in the process of creating itself into a controlling organization through the international health regulation amendments and through the coming agreement or framework. That framework says every country in the world is going to sign, if we let it, is going to sign on to an agreement that WHO can do anything it wants. With our money, why is WHO involved with our money? With our health procedures, that's One Health. With our bodies, with our minds, with our residences, with every single aspect of our existence. And the World Economic Forum, with which the United Nations, the master organization here, have signed an agreement to accelerate the implementation of Agenda 2030 and to make sure, this was last week, that all human reproduction is controlled, is synthetic. Read the first 3 chapters of Brave New World and see what the blueprint is. But that's not bad enough. They want our kids. You and I, they figure, might protest, but we can be easily eliminated by attrition or by extermination. You know, they can get rid of us. But the slaves, the new ones, they want those to be docile. They want them not to reproduce. They want them to believe anything that they're told, and they want them to accept the conditions. What are the conditions? They will live in 16 square meters of space in 10-minute cities, urban concentration camps. They will eat what they're told to eat. You will eat the bugs. They will think what they're told to think. They will do what they're told to do, and they will question nothing. They will certainly never affiliate with one another and bond. Now let's go back to my understanding as a child psychiatrist. The way I understand humanity is that the most fundamental and basic reality that defines us and drives us and elevates us to the divine is love. And that is learned starting in the womb between mother and child, chemically, emotionally, through heartbeat to heartbeat, a duet of the maternal and fetal heartbeat, which is the most profound music that we will ever hear. And by the way, can be used clinically. That's another story entirely. And then what happens when the baby is born, and by the way, in the 2022 WHO guidelines on abortion, which are quite illuminating, in addition to saying that the birthing person, because there are no mothers, there are no women, there are no girls, there are birthing persons, the birthing person can, without any question, have the child's life, or it's not a child, it's called the pregnancy tissue's life, terminated up to the point of the end of complete delivery. So a viable child, a full-term child, can be killed at the mother's request up to the moment when the child has finished exiting the birth canal. And they say that's a good thing, and nobody has the right to interfere with that worldwide. But there's sort of some problems with that ethically. And by the way, I believe in reproductive rights, but this is something quite different. So the birthing tissue needs to be brought up in a way that makes it compliant. So WHO, that's the World Holocaust Organization in my view, WHO has created a way to traumatize every child on the planet. Back to me as a child psychiatrist. Sexual stimulation and sexual predation at an age, at a developmental level before a child can handle that experience is traumatizing. Sex is part of us in the same way that reproduction is part of us and digestion is part of us. But you can poison your reproductive tract, you can poison your digestive tract, you can poison your neurological apparatus, and then it is less functional than it could have been, and it is more problematic. So if you overstimulate children, if you overwhelm them, if you sexualize them, if you focus them on sexuality, if you use their body for your own purposes in a deceptive and delusional way, if you lie to children about what's real, they are emotionally traumatized. And that trauma is also reflected in the neurological array of neurotransmitters. It is reflected in every aspect of their life. How do teachers in a school know, or parents know, that a child has been sexually abused? Behavior changes. They become inattentive to schoolwork. They become hostile. They start stealing, perhaps, or behaving in a way that is completely different from their normal behavior. Because the trauma is so overwhelming, they have limited coping mechanisms. Back to WHO. They have created the comprehensive sexuality educational curriculum to traumatize every child from birth. In the and you will find information about this at preventgenocide2030.org. There are 2 pages. One is called the transgender delusion, because here's a little secret. There are 2 genders, just 2. One is XX chromosome biologically, the other is XY. And yes, once in a while, there are a few unfortunate people who are born with both internal female sexual organs and external male sexual organs. It can happen. It's rare. It's an inborn error of metabolism, as it's called. It's a genetic error. Now, that doesn't mean that human beings are an intersex species. They're not. There are 2 genders. That's all. In the same way that people are sometimes born without arms, the condition is called phocomelia. Thalidomide can cause that, for example. Other things can cause it. People are sometimes, unfortunately, born without arms, but that doesn't mean that the human species doesn't have arms. Normal human beings have arms. Normal human beings have 2 genders. So if you tell children that gender is fluid and they can be anything they want, and if you tell children that, and if you tell parents and teachers and children that it is required that children develop lust by the age of 4, really? Anybody here have a 4-year-old? Anybody here think it's normal for a child to develop lust by the age of 4? That's one of the new norms, lust by the age of 4. Parents are supposed to teach children about their own sexuality. What that means is parents are supposed to molest children, and it's supposed to be normalized. Children, according to these monsters, have the right, even human rights have been perverted by these people. Children have the right to a sexual partner, and, quote, sexual activity must begin as early as possible. Really, sexual activity must begin as early as possible. 6-year-olds in this curriculum are given a checklist to determine whether they want to have sex with a particular person. Stop for a moment. Do you want your 6-year-old to have sex with anybody? Do you want anybody to have sex with your 6-year-old? The answer should be, if you're a normal human being, no, and hell no. Here's a list of things that are on that checklist. I'm quoting. 1, do I want to be with that person? Well, children want to be with people all the time. That doesn't mean they should be having sex with them. 2, do I want to hold hands with that person? What? Do I want to hold hands with that person? 3, do I like that person? Well, now we've got 3 yeses. I like this person. I want to hold hands with them and I want to be with them. Great. And do I want to have anal sex with this person? This is on a 6-year-old's checklist. Do I want to have oral sex with this person? Do I want to have vaginal sex with this person, genital sex with this person? Now, how does a 3-year-old know about, a 6-year-old, I'm sorry, know about oral sex? Well, we have a video of a teacher in a classroom following this curriculum, instructing a little girl while the children are standing around in the finer points of cunnilingus on a little boy. This is part of their sexual trauma. Everyone gets traumatized. Their books in a picture book for toddlers. See, now we're reading this picture book together, and it says that doctors are guessing when they assign the gender of a baby. No, folks, doctors are not guessing. Doctors don't assign gender. Doctors identify gender because it's not fluid. There are gender fluids. In my mind, the gender fluids are semen and vaginal secretions. Those are gender fluids. Those are the only fluidities associated with gender in my mind. That, by the way, may not translate well to Hebrew, but it's a joke in English. Anyway, the point is that by the age of 6, children should begin becoming accomplished in the use of online pornography. And by the age of 9, they should be completely competent in the use of online pornography. Excuse me, what is the use of online pornography for a child? Nothing, in my view. But then what do I know? I'm just a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I understand sexualization trauma. This is designed to, according to the Rutgers Foundation, which is one of the organizations that the World Health Organization has drawn heavily on in creating these documents and guidelines, children who are freed from the bonds of the family. That means parents have no place in this. Children have absolute right to make all of their own determinations sexually in terms of their gender, what they do with their body from basically birth, and parents have nothing to say. Children who are freed from the bonds of the slavery bonds of the family are then less likely to reproduce. So all of this is based in controlling reproduction and destroying the willingness to bond, to love, to trust, and to rear children. This is Brave New World. I strongly suggest you read the first 3 chapters of Brave New World. And by the way, the worst curse word that anybody could utter in Brave New World was mother. And mother is no longer an acceptable term in the United States government scientific agencies. Birthing person is the term that is to be used. The language is being taken away from us to restrict our ability to think, and therefore to question, and therefore to resist. So this curriculum goes on and on, but what about child predators? Aren't they criminals? Isn't that a bad thing? Well, now let's go to the United Nations. On March 8th of this year, the United Nations issued a judicial review document, a guideline for every legislator, prosecutor, lawyer, and judge in the world. Why would a peacekeeping organization feel the need to issue a judicial guidelines? I don't know, got me. But anyway, they did. And one of the things that it says is that worldwide, the recommendation is to decriminalize sexual activity between anybody. That means normalize pedophilia. Since, according to WHO, quote, sexual activity must begin as early as possible, and quote, every child has the right to a sexual partner. And since in the judicial review, consent is defined as present everywhere for everything at every moment, it means if somebody says to a 3-year-old, touch me here and I'll give you a piece of candy, and the 3-year-old, with all the wisdom and judgment that a 3-year-old has, says, okay, that's not a criminal act. Conversely, if somebody says, let me touch you there and I'll give you a piece of candy, and the 3-year-old says, okay, that's also not a criminal act. So we have the UN, the Imperium, if you will, and the Death Star, the WHO, which is coming over the horizon to kill us on the orders of the Imperium, working together to create insanity, to create a level of untruth that is meant to confuse, to conflict, and to paralyze any kind of opposition. And of course, if you oppose this gender fluid nonsense and the mutilation, which is horrendous, the mutilation of the bodies of perfectly healthy, beautiful young children who are now allowed under this schema to decide that they want their breasts cut off, or they want their penises inverted to make-believe vaginas, or cut off altogether, or whatever, or that the girls should have their clitorises distorted and surgically altered to make micro penises. I kid you not, this is what's going on. And hormones should be given, and puberty blockers should be given, and life-altering decisions can be made by children who then are at risk for God knows what lifelong consequences. But that's okay with the masters, because along the way, they're also the medical environment making all the money and saying that it's really good to have more customers who need hormones and surgeries and God knows what, and of course they're going to get cancer and whatever all their lives. That's okay, because that all works into the power structure of the system and makes people more dependent and more controllable, those who are allowed to survive. So what do we do about this? Yes.
I just wanted to say that exactly. What do we do about it?
Exactly.
But I wanted to keep you informed that in Israel, they are working on a legal level. You may be surprised to hear that. Recently, they're trying to rule a law which says that you cannot compare what is happening now to what happened under the Nazi regime.
Right, because our thoughts have to be controlled. God knows that if we were allowed to think and speak freely, we might not agree with the hegemony and the narrative. So we have to control what we're allowed to say and take away our language and control what we're allowed to think. There's a similar law in Germany, and Dr. Susharat Bhakti was tried and exonerated for making reference to what was correctly stated, and somehow he was not penalized. I mean, justice actually prevailed in that case. This is a worldwide trend, and it must be stopped. It must be thwarted. But what can we do? You know, because your website says Israel exits who, right? You know that we have to get out from under. Everything that they want to do is legally binding only on member states. Currently, every state, every nation state in the world is a member state, so that's a bit of a problem. But how does a country leave a treaty obligation? In 1969, the Vienna Treaty on Treaties stated clearly that if a treaty is ratified by a state, and the other side of the treaty, in this case, the World Health Organization, materially changes the terms and conditions upon which the treaty was agreed to, then the other side has the right and indeed the obligation to walk away from the treaty, to abrogate the previously ratified treaty. That is a legal, non-aggression deserving act on the part of a member state. Now, the WHO was agreed to as if it were a treaty obligation in the late 1940s. I don't know the exact year that Israel signed on to the World Health Organization, but it's a separate organization from the United Nations. And Israel, like every other country in the world, has the ability to do a very simple thing, and that is have the head of state, whoever fills that chair at the moment, write a simple letter that says Israel is no longer a member of the WHO. Now, to be nice about it, Israel should pay that year's financial obligation, but if you don't, you don't. So that letter is simple to write. What's hard is developing the political will to force that letter to be written, because your prime minister, my president, is it really my president, the president of the country in which I live, every other head of state has signed on and is completely controlled, corrupted, and co-opted. And I don't care what they think. People say they're never going to change their minds. I couldn't care less what they think. I couldn't care less what they believe. I couldn't care less whom they think they owe allegiance to. What I want them to do is act the way I want them to act. Now, how do we do that? It turns out that we go back for a moment to Sun Tzu, who 3,500 years ago told us how to win wars and how to lose wars. The way you lose a war is by violating the principles of war. The way you win a war is by following the principles of war and also having superior force where you need it, and so on and so on. But you can't win a war if you violate the principles of war. I was taught that by a brilliant strategic analyst, my husband, Major General Albert N. Stubblebine III, a retired U.S. Army general who retired as the head of the Intelligence and Security Command. And when I finally got him to look at the facts and data, became a warrior on our side, and a brilliant one who was murdered for this work, by the way. And so what I learned from him before he died was that Sun Tzu is worth paying attention to. Sun Tzu says you take your greatest strength and put it against your enemy's greatest weakness. Now, what is our greatest strength? Our greatest strength is numbers. Your prime minister, Netanyahu, sold you to Pfizer as slaves, as experimental lab rats, for God knows what reason and for God knows how much money and emolument. Who cares? The fact is that you had been sold as slaves, by God, to biological slaves, to this organization. But you still have the rights of a democracy, of a legitimate government citizenship left to you. And therefore, if you take your numbers and you use them by pounding the Knesset and by pounding the prime minister's office and your minister of health and whoever is in the line of control with tremendous numbers of emails, not one, not six, not 47, but millions of email, and you continue the debate and talk and agitation and interviews and so on, and create a public foment. My favorite law firm, which operates internationally, is Hubbub and Uproar. You need hubbub and uproar, and you need people expressing their urgent, immensely energized demand to get out of WHO. Now, that may sound naive, but let me tell you a quick couple of stories. In 2009, Kathleen Sebelius, the head of Health and Human Services of the United States, that's like our Minister of Health, same position, announced to Congress on September 15th, didn't ask Congress for permission, announced to Congress that the FDA, Fraud and Death Administration, had already funded and bought all the supplies for a mandatory swine flu vaccination program. By the way, do you know how many people, according to WHO itself, died of swine flu worldwide, this pandemic that was going to wipe us all out? 11. That's their best, highest estimate. So this deadly pandemic was upon us and we needed a mandatory vaccination program. Does that sound familiar? And she said there were 90,000 administration stations across the United States, and FDA had purchased the entire swine flu vaccine production of 5 companies, but they still didn't have enough antigen, which is the working end of a vaccine. So they were going to adjuvant it by admixing at the 90,000 administration stations a particular amount of a particular substance called squalene. And she said, our scientists will not sign off on this, but we're going to do it anyway. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Why does she specify that their scientists won't sign off on it. And why is she using this novel, highly toxic adjuvant in that particular dose? So I went looking, and I found that the United States government held 2 patents, one for the use of this squalene substance at that particular dose injected with a vaccine to create immune-mediated, irreversible male sterility, and another one for females to create immune-mediated, irreversible female infertility. They were going to sterilize the entire population, men, women, and children of the United States without telling them that that's what they were doing, allegedly saving them. That should sound very familiar. So I told people about that, and I gave them the option of filling in their name, address, and postal code and hitting the word send. Each send dispersed 28 letters to their congressman, their governor, the Health and Human Services secretary, the White House, the vice president, everybody I could think of, 28 letters. In 11 days, 3.5 million people took that action. On day 12, Kathleen Sebelius, that's 28 times 3.5 million, by the way, that's a lot.
Amazing.
Kathleen Sebelius on day 12 said, okay, we won't do that. And that program was never instituted, in spite of the fact that they had bought $500 million worth of squalene and all the rest of the stuff. I've had that experience over and over in the United States, in Chile, elsewhere. It is the numbers, it is the voices saying the 3 most important words that a human being can utter, an adult human being can say, and those are, don't you dare. And we must say, the Israeli population must say, riding the Freedom Mouse, everybody's got one, must say to the Knesset, to the Minister of Health, to the Prime Minister, don't you dare. Not only don't you touch my children, don't you touch my society, don't you touch my body, don't you confine me in 10-minute cities, in concentration camps, in urban dog kennels. No, no, this is not happening. My country leaves WHO. Now, Prevent Genocide 2030 is an international site. If you would like to work with us, all of the information there, of course, is available for everyone. You can translate anything you like. If you want us to work with you to create an automatic dispersal action, we will do that. That's available to you. But whether you work with our website, whether you don't, is secondary. What's important is you must, to save humanity, literally to save humanity, you must get your country out of WHO. There's no temporizing with these monsters. You don't negotiate with terrorists. These people are beyond terrorists, and they have given themselves authority and sheen and shine and luster because they have more money than God and because they will lie about anything. These are evil, evil beings who have created a program of ultimate destruction and enslavement. If the parents of Israel, if the grandparents of Israel, if the neighbors of Israel don't care about what they're doing to their children, then they've already laid down and said, kill me now.
Dr. רימה, I want to thank you so much